relate to is the defeated 1960s. So yeah, the Black Panthers is an obvious reference. They had the biggest influence on my actual writing. So I read the Black Panthers anthologies. But so I came to politicization via the War on Terror. So the first real big protest I went on was the Iraq War demonstration in 2003, where 2 million people came on the streets of Britain. There's a longer term war on terror. So the 1960s had movements like COINTELPRO, which was a war against leftist movements, Latin American anti-imperialist movements, and all these people were in prison. And so I thought in the longer frame, plus my brother, when you go into solitary confinement, you become part of this globalized community of other people in solitary confinement. So Angela Davis was in solitary confinement. All these forgotten about prisoners. I collected a lot of these prisoner anthologies. So my main point in which to learn about critical theory or the language of like critiquing power and the state was through reading prisoner writing, to me, which is more important than reading Donna Haraway or these trendy art world names. So I also, in the 19th century, you have like all these forms of science fiction and speculative fiction, which essentially write about imagined futures. So one of the founders of science fiction is a Bengali woman called Ruqayya Begum, and she wrote a book called Sultana's Dream in the 19th century. And it was a sci-fi story about men doing the housework, which was science fiction in the 19th century. But I think 100 years later is that, you know, like men do housework, right? So it was a totally imagined future. And then also what became the British welfare state after World War II, which was introduced by Clement Attlee in the Labour government, that was also had its roots in William Morris. William Morris is like a British arts and craft movement. So he wrote this book called News from Nowhere, which is a utopic idea of socialism, again rooted in an imagined future. But I find anyone involved in like a leftist movement, you know, they live a bit in their imagination. You know, they always imagine they're bigger than they actually are, especially in Britain. Like every Trotskyist party or anarchist imagines they're like some big global movement, but it's usually, you know, just a handful of their friends or whatever. So I don't know. There's a nice quote by so imagination is the vehicle of hope, and fantasy is the vehicle of despair. I used to be in a collective called Other Asias that I set up in 2008 after I finished my masters, and there was so much infighting, and you know, all these great bands like The Clash, the English punk band, and Pink Floyd, they all broke up, right? And they all collectives always argue amongst each other, and it made me very depressed. That's part of the reason I wanted to leave the art world, because of all the fallouts and infighting of these collectives. So when I set up a totally imaginary collective and a totally imaginary liberation movement, totally imaginary party, I actually felt happier and also more liberated. And I also thought I did more effective work in this movement that doesn't actually exist. And people, so I speak in an art context, but I often just speak at an actual activist context. So I speak in festivals where they have serious events on like refugee crisis, and then me speaking about fighting extrovert supremacy, and serious anti-fascist organisations. And as I said, there was a nurses union who was asking me how to, a real trade union, like a large trade union, asking me how to do this in the public health system. Also, I don't know if this word is so big in Britain, but there's what is called the neurodiversity movement. How do you say that in Spanish? Is it
Igual, el same.
Oh, is it a big thing here? I have no idea. So for people who are new to the concept of neurodiversity, it was a term invented in the late 1990s by a Jewish Australian sociologist called Judy Singer, and she was autistic, and she inspired by the LGBTQI movement, she saw, oh, this is, which were also pathologized, and in the American Psychiatric Manual, she was like, oh, this is just another sensibility. Everyone has different forms of sensory processing. How do we improve the world? So just in the last 5 years, it's become quite a big thing in arts institutions. So people with autism, I'm diagnosed bipolar, so that's sometimes in this family, dyspraxia, ADHD. I don't know what the Spanish equivalents of these are, or Catalan equivalents, viewing themselves as part of the progressive wave of movements. So the neurodiversity movement has adopted the book, and it's on these curriculums, about serious curriculums about the politics and public health care. So this made-up book has become part of this real movement, which has totally adopted it. And Jorin, you see Jeremy Corbyn in this film. Is he known in this part of the world?
Yeah.
So yeah, I personally knew Jeremy Corbyn, and he helped my family campaign a lot. He's a very good man. He's a bit too soft, right? Unlike I think Podemos is better as a whole as a